Welcome to the 2022 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival and this panel, Arcoiris, Queer Latinx Storytelling. Before we begin, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box and don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you're a school, classroom librarian, or educator joining us, please enter our classroom book set giveaway. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. So before we begin, I think it would probably be smartest thing to do is just go ahead and do some introductions. So why don't we do Raquel, Vincent, and then Crystal?
The pressure of going first. Hi, I'm Raquel Marie. I'm the author of Ophelia After All. I feel like I'm going to be pointing in the wrong place at times. I'm the author of Ophelia After All. It is a YA contemporary coming out of age story about a teenage girl questioning her sexuality in the weeks leading up to her senior prom and high school graduation. And it's a 2022 debut, so it only came out a few months ago.
Hi, I'm Vincent. I'm the author of Burn Down, Rise Up. It is a YA horror about kids in the Bronx having to scale their own version of the Upside Down in trying to find their missing friend. It's also a 2022 debut, came out a couple of months ago. Please buy it.
Just echoing, please buy all these books, right? Like we need your love. So I am Crystal Maldonado. I am a young adult author of contemporary stories. So No Filter and Other Lies is my book, which is also back there, again, pointing, is not my strong suit. So this is my story of a 17-year-old girl named Kat Sanchez, and it tells the story of her coming into her bisexuality, kind of as she is also catfishing on Instagram and lying a lot to everyone around her. So there's a lot of hijinks, a lot of like great friends just making fun of each other constantly. There's a lot of dogs. So there's some sapphic romance in there. So there's a little something for everybody.
Perfect. And I am Johnny Garzavia. My book is 1500 Miles from the Sun, which did not come out this year, but is, I like to call it like Selena's Dreaming of You, but if you make it gay. It's centers Julian Luna, a Corpus Christi, Texas high school senior who accidentally comes out on Twitter after having a little bit too much fun at a party. And then my next book is Under Something We're Here, which comes out next April. And I, for one, love all of your books, and I am super excited to talk about them because they're honestly some of my favorites of this entire year. So first question, and like an icebreaker sort of scenario, your characters all take on specific sort of interests, whether it's photography, botany, trying to survive a potentially deadly urban legend. So I am curious if y'all had any specific high school interest, like the kind that just sort of defined you in those 4 years. I know I myself was like a huge band nerd, and that sort of like defined me and who I was to the 400 or so people in my high school. But I would love to know like what y'all's defining identity was back then.
I feel like the funnier answer and probably more accurate is that I was like the straight ally at the time. Like I was very, very concerned with the queer community from a fully ally standpoint. I just really cared about other people's concerns and issues and advocating for those things. So that's probably the more accurate one. But I also did a lot of makeup in high school and took classes and would provide makeup services for like students through the school for school dances and stuff. Like the school would pay me and other kids in the class so that kids could get makeup done for free for school dances. So that was really fun, and that was something I feel like I was known for that I can still say runs true today. I no longer quite identify as a straight ally.
I guess for me, I was very, very weirdly into urban legends, which I say weirdly because I was such a weenie that I couldn't watch horror movies at the time. So I guess I just filled my time like scrolling through like Reddit no sleep stories and just trying to like like just like read something that's like kind of spooky or whatever. So that was like what kind of defined me. I was just like, oh man, I got to see if there's any good like no sleep stories out there again.
Okay, I love these. They're like nothing like I expected. It's like makeup, just scrolling through scary stories. I very much like Kat had kind of a secret identity online. So I will say what I was known for like in high school and then what I actually did. So like in high school, I was like an art kid. I was always in the art room, like making paintings and I don't know, doing sketchings of Britney Spears and stuff. And then online, I was a live journal girly. And so I was making layouts for my live journal and writing fanfic and making, like, spending hours, I kid you not, making icons. Like, so back in the day, before it was an avatar, it was called an icon. And I would just pour through photos of Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera as a fully straight person, because I was straight. I was just looking. And like just taking the time to stare at these beautiful photos, definitely not bi, and making icons. So that's what I was doing.
I feel like this is just the best sort of breakfast club that I could have wished for. I mean, so many allies won, so we love to see it. Next question, now that we've gone through that. Last time we had this panel, it was with authors that were known for and that were currently writing fantasy stories and magical realism stories. This year, we get to have authors who are mostly writing contemporary stories, which is exciting for me personally as a writer of contemporary stories. So I would love to know, what is it about using our world as a setting that inspires you and the stories you tell?
I think for me, it's that growing up, a lot of the stories that I connected to the most were stories that were just about kids navigating like everyday problems and everyday issues. And it felt really validating for me that like, oh, my problems and my concerns and the things that I'm dealing with are enough to be considered a story. Like there's value to them. There's lessons you can derive from them. So that's really what inspired me to have such a focus in contemporary, because that was what provided me such a home and comfort when I was growing up. But I also think, yeah, there's so much about the real world that is interesting and exciting. Just like the contemporary genre in general, I feel like you can do so much with, because you don't always have to lean entirely into the realism of the world. You can still do like high stakes things or things that maybe not everyone would necessarily connect to. Like there's a lot about reality that is not always particularly realistic, so it's a fun playground to mess around with, because it's something that's really familiar but also can be manipulated a lot differently than maybe people would expect it to be.
So I don't know if I've ever read a book, a fiction book that was like set in the Bronx. I don't know. They have to exist. Like I'm not gonna say I'm the first one. There absolutely has to exist. Maybe I just have not come across it yet, but I've always thought that it would be just kind of fun to have like a book set in the Bronx that is not about, the typical Bronx things that everyone associates us with. I wanted to go into like a magical realism sort of route for it, because I just thought that with the kind of history that the Bronx has, it would fit very well together. Sorry, my cat likes to fuss with my keyboard. Yeah, so that's just something that I wanted to do, where it was just like, oh, I haven't read another book that's set in the Bronx. I want to do that. And so that's why I kind of like use that setting.
So for me, I also have just like a personal love of contemporary stories. It's always what I've like gravitated towards, and it's what's brought me comfort. I very selfishly think that queer Latina stories deserve to be in every genre. So like we deserve to be elves and magicians and witches and wizards and all of that wonderfulness. But I also think there's like a special kind of magic in seeing yourself in the contemporary and seeing yourself in the real world, because that's where we exist. And especially in the young adult genre, when you're like living every day, it's nice to kind of see that reflection and have it on the page and like have that mirror kind of held up to you and just be reminded that you and your existence matter. And I think if I had read and been exposed to more queer stories when I was growing up, like queer contemporary stories, I think maybe I wouldn't have been a straight ally for as long as I was, because I would have known like, oh, this is me and like I identify as this. But I just, you know, when you're not exposed to things, sometimes you just have no idea and it doesn't give you that ability to like explore your own identity. So I think there's just like a lot of power in the normal, right? In the everyday, and the ability to sort of see that in books.
I love all of those, resonate super highly with those. I think especially Crystal, with what you said about just like this magic about it. The past 2 years, I've been able to moderate some sort of queer panel, and we've always talked about just like the inherent magic of queer stories. And I think that like melding that magicalness with, you know, stories set in a place that is familiar to us and familiar to readers is something so cool and like powerful, and shows that like existence is both magical but also real. And I think that like that sort of sets at least me as a queer reader up for like, yeah, like I'm powerful and like I can do anything, and especially in places like Texas and like South Texas, which where I write stories about, and being able to see us exist in a place like that, I think really is a great thing. As much as we, again, like y'all said, need stories with elves and warlocks and whatever. Next question. I love seeing stories of queer excellence and bravery and all that sort of energy. But I also love seeing queer characters, especially BIPOC queer characters, getting to be messy, which I think y'all accomplish very well. So can we talk about writing like imperfect characters and maybe those sort of stories that aren't 100% pretty and impeccable?
Yeah, I love messy characters in general, and I feel like particularly teenage characters often get demonized for their messiness in a way that feels really unfair, and but also true to the way society often demonizes teenagers for experiencing emotions and just trying to navigate what it means to be a person. But you see in fiction, like, messy characters are not allowed to also be marginalized. Like, the way that audiences respond to characters that are marginalized, that make mistakes and are flawed human beings, feels very often like they're just waiting for them to make mistakes that give them permission to dislike them in some way. So I really love reading books where characters come from marginalized backgrounds and they are imperfect people, because it's unfortunate that we feel the need to give children that permission. But when you live in a society that is just constantly waiting for you to mess up in some way that makes them feel like it's valid for now people to judge you or demonize you or ostracize you further, you do feel like you need to reach some certain standard of perfection, and that in some way it's something you can control, when that's just not, it's not anyone's individual responsibility to be perfect enough to avoid that type of judgment and treatment. So it feels very like validating to write teenagers that come from a variety of backgrounds and who are allowed to be messy and make mistakes and be flawed and be full realized people, because I think that's ultimately what it boils down to, is allowing fictional characters that, you know, are not white, cishet, able-bodied, like, to exist the way that real people do, because no one is a perfectly well-rounded, flawless human being. I keep hitting my headphones. That never makes a single mistake. And when we expect that of fictional characters that only belong to particular backgrounds, we're expecting them to be cardboard cutouts rather than real people. And again, it all boils down to just having a different set of expectations. So it makes me feel very joyful when I read books that have incredibly messy teenage characters, and the narrative is like, feels like it's already forgiving them while allowing them space to recognize their flaws and be better and continue to grow as people, but is not just like setting them up for failure by like trying to make some type of point of like, look, see, we were right, like they're a bad person. Just giving teenagers like permission to exist as real people and navigate that space of of transitioning from a child into an adult and figuring out what that means is really, really important.
Messy characters. I never thought of it as like them being also okay. So even when we write like like marginalized characters who are like perfect or whatever, then you get hit with like, oh, they're Mary Sue's. Like, I'm just like, miss me with that. Anyways, I just had to get that point out there. Like, we can't have them be flawless because then that's a whole other can of worms, and it's just like nothing's good enough for you guys. I never thought about them being like messy. I just thought that like, okay, like this just makes sense for a teenager to do, you know, like it just makes sense for them to not know how to navigate their emotions, or to kind of have like, you know, like little panicking moments where they're just like, I'm just going to do this thing because it's the first thing that came to mind. And, you know, I'll deal with the consequences later. Like, it just makes sense for teenagers to act that way. On the other hand, I really like messy teenagers because like when I'm reading them, I feel like I'm the parent, and I'm just kind of like, you need to go and like, you just time out. We need a timeout. You need hot second, my cat hit a button and everything's weird on my computer. Sorry, give me a second. Bugsy, why are you like this?
You're all good. The cat looks
You're
very
fine.
cute. So honestly, I forgive them for any
That name Bugsy.
His name's Bugsy.
Oh my
He's a very quiet cat, which is why I didn't like mind like him being here. But he also does this annoying thing where he likes to get on the table and like cuddle up because I'm here and he wants attention, but I'm like, I'm busy.
He heard we were giving permission to messy characters and said,
He was like, I'm in.
Okay, we're good now. Okay, where was I? Yeah, I always feel like the parent whenever I'm like reading like teenagers like being messy. Like I was just I think the other day I just finished reading Beating Heart Baby by Leo Min, and I was like, Sua, you are so mean. It makes no sense. Like I was livid. I was just like, someone needs to put this boy in a timeout. I'm not dealing. Like I was just, I have so many feelings about messy teenage characters because it makes me feel like a parent, and I'm just like, I need someone to parent you, and I can't let the fictional parents do it. I got to do it. So like that's just how I feel. I just have so many feelings about them. It pulls me into the story essentially. Like it just makes me it makes it more realistic to me and makes these characters feel more realistic.
I totally agree, and I really just enjoy messy characters because I feel like they give you so much to work with, and they feel so real. They just feel like actual people versus just being kind of two-dimensional. And I do want to just like, I personally recognize or feel like my experience has been that young readers are really like excited about messy characters and kind of want to see these characters make mistakes and normalize imperfection and sort of go on these journeys to figure themselves out, versus I love adult readers, but I feel like adult readers sometimes get so mad at these characters and they're like, oh, they're deeply irritating and annoying. And I get that, but the reality is like, humans are deeply irritating and annoying no matter what age. And so I think being able to read a book and see people mess up and learn and grow is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be able to see. It helps us not just feel like we can learn and grow, but it also helps us sometimes recognize patterns or traits in ourselves that maybe we want to work on. It helps us recognize good things in ourselves too. I think it helps us practice kind of empathy as readers when we can see someone who does something that we disagree with or does something that we don't like, but still continue on in the book and root for them and really want good things for them. And I think that helps just create kind of a more empathetic society, which I'm all about. And then there's this side of us that, or at least for me, like I am deeply nosy and I am also sometimes judgmental. Again, humans are irritating and annoying. And so sometimes I love to read a messy character and be like, oh, at least I'm not that messed up, okay? So I got my stuff together compared to this character. So sometimes you just need a little validation and a little boost, and that helps too.
Yeah, yes, correct. Yeah, like I mean, as a writer, I think y'all really like put it into words that are much better than mine. But like, you know, we recognize that messiness is really, when you get down to it, just being human, like that those equal each other. As a reader, I love stress and mess when it comes to characters. Like, please give me anxiety. That's my favorite. And just like as a human, as a former teenager, like in my teenage years, I tried so hard to be just so rigid and perfect and unperceivable. And like, you know what? Mess still found me for some reason. And so, like, I think. Like when you look at the reality of the situation, like you're gonna be a mess regardless of if you want to be or not, because that's just how life works. And so implementing that and like letting characters be that and doing it unapologetically, I think is just such a great thing to see and such a strong thing to see. Um, Vincent, your book specifically adds elements of horror and thriller and like fully give me nightmares. And I am curious about your thoughts, and then Crystal and Raquel's thoughts too, on not only how like Latina identity comes into play with your writing thrillers and scary stuff, but how our queerness informs that as well. Just how does identity and these parts of ourselves shape our storytelling?
Um, so that's a really good question. I've always thought of it in because like our identities fully shape us, it also informs the way we deal with situations. And so in like the in a horror setting, it's gonna like go a little bit more differently, you know, because I mean I've put down so many jokes in my book about like how with this is going to be odd because the main character of my book's named Raquel, and Raquel is also here. So this is so, so in my book, Raquel makes all these jokes saying just like, you know what, we're gonna survive this. We're not gonna make all these dumb mistakes that white people make. We're gonna like, and then they do it anyways, and it's just like, you know, like I like that it's very tongue in cheek, especially because even myself, when I'm watching like horror movies and I'm just kind of like taking in like what each character is doing, I'm thinking like I wouldn't do that. But then like there are times when I'm home alone and I'm thinking and I'm getting a little bit like scared. I'm just like, you know what? Maybe if I just stay very still and don't do anything, the monster will not find me. Which is just like a dumb mistake that a character would make in a movie. So um it's a lot of it's just like very tongue-in-cheek when I write, just kind of acknowledging like this is what happens, and with Raquel being like she's Latina, she's black, she's queer, she's like fully aware of all of these things while she's dealing with a horror situation, and she's trying to reconcile it in like her own way, because I mean like Crystal, there is like, you know, some sapphic romance happening, and so there's just like a lot of her, um, like dealing with the monster and also being like, all right, how do I deal with the fact that I'm sort of in love with my best friend's crush? Like, how do I tell him that? Like, what's the situation? How am I gonna deal with this? Bugsy, get out of the way! My cat is just go away. Sorry, he was distracting me. Um, yeah, so it's always like very uh it's kind of like playing life on hard mode. Just like I want to survive, but also when I do survive, how am I going to deal with like these other things that I can't really escape? Like I can escape this monster, I'm not going to escape my feelings for this girl. What's the plan there? Like, so yeah, that's how I've like always tried to include identity within a horror landscape.
Oh my. Sorry, I was waiting to see if my dogs were going to start barking because they're right outside of my room. Let me know if you start hearing them. I don't think the mic should pick them up, but just let me know if that becomes a problem. It's funny, for this question, I almost want to talk about a short story that I have that's coming out in September in an anthology called Our Shadows Have Claws, which I wrote a horror story, and that's the first time I ever wrote horror. But in it, the sort of villainized portrayal, like the expected villain in the story is of a Colombian myth, and she's a sort of succubus figure. And I wanted to play around with the way that women, and particularly like Latino women, their anger is perceived by other people, and the way that it's, you know, framed as like just being over dramatic and unnecessary and spiteful, regardless of like the actual context of the situation. And the villain of the story, the actual villain, turns out to just be like a kind of homophobic, like bad boyfriend. And so like playing around with that was really interesting for me, because I was able to take some tropes of horror, and like it's set on like a senior camping trip gone wrong, and like it was fun to play around with that stuff while infusing it with these aspects of identity, because it's set in the real world, and these things like affect our stories just naturally, because it's how we navigate the world, it's how we see the world, and it's sort of inevitable when you're setting books in contemporary society that you're not going to engage with any aspect of your character's identities, because the way that society is formed, that's inevitable for people to do. And so it was cool to get to like switch things around like that, while also like making a point and, you know, getting to have some fun with it, but there being a sort of lesson in there about the way that stories are told and the way that anger is weaponized against Latino women, and the sort of misogyny and machismo of the way that we talk about some of these conflicts, and often blame women in situations where it's far more complex than that, or there may be other context. But so that was nothing about this book, but it was my fun dive into horror, and I feel like that was a time where I really was considering the way that my characters' identities were portrayed in contemporary society.
I just want to say I can't wait to read that anthology. It's all horror, and it's all, I think, Latina authors, right? Like doing their thing. So it's going to be really good. So I haven't written traditional horror stories, but I find that there is horror in heartbreak. So I feel like that's kind of where my sort of side comes in. So I think that for me, identity obviously plays a huge role in these characters that we're creating, because as Vincent said, you can't divorce yourself from your experience, like your lived experience, right? So our characters, their identities influence just how they experience the world, but how they see themselves and how they interact with other people. And so I just love the intersection of those identities, and to be able to use our books and our stories and our characters to dial into like the specificity of what we're experiencing, because I think that has been missing from books, at least for me, for so long. Just this idea of, you get really good at reading like white, cis, heterosexual characters and finding yourself in those characters, but it's missing these like nuances, right? And these things that we experience, and that when we're in a group of peers who are similar to us, we don't necessarily have to have this lead up when we're talking about like microaggressions, and just talking about, like, as someone who's fat, talking with other fat folks about like how hard it is to buy clothes at the store, and like having that, like picking up a book and seeing those experiences without the exposition of what this is, and you just like jump in, and you just feel like at home, right? Like you feel like, oh, this author gets me and they understand me. And I think that is so powerful when we're talking about our identities and having these experiences shape our stories. So in No Filter, I used my kind of experience when I was in high school, like going back to this straight ally theme. Like I spent a lot of time around a lot of queer men, but I didn't know a lot of queer women growing up. So that didn't even seem like an accessible thing for me in my very small town. And now that I'm older and I've been around more queer folks, I realized that my experience was similar to a lot of folks who were also like bi, but didn't know they were bi, and had these thoughts of like, oh, well, everybody would just like kiss and date a girl because women are just perfect. And it turns out, oh, that's actually like specifically bisexual, and like that's a thing people experience but didn't realize it. And so the power in talking about those experiences, and like giving Kat a similar experience to something I had felt really validating, not just to me, but also hopefully to readers who are like, oh yeah, I totally had something similar happen to me. And it's nice to be able to like bring those elements into a story and make it real.
Yeah, I love those. I love just asking that question in general and getting other authors' perspectives on just writing identities and marginalizations. I just love seeing like, okay, like what's been the white take on this certain book? Like my first one was very much like, what if Love Simon was Tejano and in South Texas? And like my second one is like, okay, like we have so many like white foodie stories. What if there was a taqueria? And like, you know, the third one is kind of just like, yeah, we have so many like white orchestra and band and performing arts ones. What if it was mariachi? Like, you know, we can kind of like put our own identities into things that haven't necessarily been maybe for us or we haven't seen ourselves in, and just like fully make it who we are and who our culture is. And I just love taking up that space. Um, we have, then we have like a couple more. If we want to like quickly do one more question, and this is one of my favorites also to ask on panels. If you just have like one recommendation, what queer Latina kid lit book would you recommend to everyone watching?
I would recommend, it's somewhere near me. Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno. It's got like subtle bisexual representation in it, and I will say I take a lot of pride in the fact that the like crush that is the main character mentions having on a girl who works in an ice cream shop. In Nina Moreno's second book, that character is named, and she's named after me. So I, this is a self-indulgent response. But Don't Date Rosa Santos is like a love story, family story. It's like slice of life, but also deals with some magical realism elements, a lot of like diaspora feelings. It was one of the first books I ever read that felt like it really got like a lot of the nuances of being Cuban American, and just like having familial problems. I identified with it so much, and I would just like constantly cry when I was reading it just from the feeling of being seen. So it's one that I very often like to recommend, just because it was one that I think it meant a lot to me when I read it, and I was still barely out of my teens when I read it, but I feel like it would have been just like changed the world for me if I would have read it when I was a teenager.
Definitely Witchlings by Claribel Ortega. I just it's Latinos are witches. That's it. That is the whole concept. That's all you need to know. It's great. I also just I'm in love with the cover art of it. It's very cute. It's a middle grade book, but it's still absolutely fabulous for anyone who likes to read a certain book about, you know, witches in schools and stuff. We don't need to go into details, but it's a better version. Anyways, yeah. So Witchlings by Gladybell.
Hashtag House Goose.
Name.
I'm House Frog.
I'm totally House Frog.
Okay, goose versus frog in this. Let's
that.
Let's go off. So for me, if I can recommend one author, I think I would recommend anything by Anna Marie McLemore, like Wild Beauty, The Mirror Season. Just everything they write is just pure perfection. But I also super highly recommend Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. I mean, it is fat girl, Puerto Rican, like her and Charlie would be friends, like my Charlie Vega from my first book. So I feel like it captures so much of just like figuring out who you are and who you want to be. And it's just this beautiful journey of self-discovery and celebrating how sometimes that journey is super messy and you don't have to know everything when you get started. The fun is in discovering who you are and where you're going.
Love that. Mine would be Only Pieces by Eteo. It is a novel in verse. It's very like it has a lot of the same feels, I think, as 1500 Miles from the Sun, but it's very much just like navigating your first crush and like all those sort of emotions that come with that, and figuring out how to come out to your parents and coming out, and it's so good. It hit me right in the soul. Yeah, would absolutely recommend that one. Perfect. So I think with that, we will be moving on to some student questions.
How do you develop your characters in a unique and original way so that they're not cliches?
This is one of my favorite questions. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for y'all's answers. Raquel?
I think this plays into the question we were answering earlier about writing messy characters. I think when you write characters that are allowed to make mistakes and be flawed without demonizing them for it, and just allowing there to be nuance in the way that they approach conflict, in the way that they solve conflict or approach their mistakes, prevents them from falling into the trap of stereotypes or cliches. But I also think there's something really cool about people reclaiming stereotypes and cliches and allowing their characters to fall into some of those sort of conventional or whatnot ideas about characters that may belong to similar backgrounds, because it's an unfortunate feeling that you can't explore certain aspects of identity that maybe people would consider a cliche or a stereotype when they may be true for certain people, and that doesn't make them true for an identity as a whole. But like, individual people are allowed to have their own imperfections or flaws or interests or responses to things, and so just allowing them to be fully fledged people that feel more authentic to you and to people that you've experienced in real life. I think that plays into it a lot. Just allowing them to make mistakes and worrying less about falling into what other people may consider more conventional or normal or expected of characters belonging to that identity, and just trying to treat them as if they were a real person, where real people do end up falling into stereotypes and cliches sometimes, but they also have more to that beyond them because they're real people.
So my mom calls me a chismosa for this, but I love to hear about other people. I love to know what other people are doing. I love to people watch. I don't talk much about myself, like just in general, but I'm like always like zeroed in on what other people are doing. And so that informs a lot of my characters, because then I get a sense of like, oh, okay, so if this character had this particular background, then this is what they would do in this given situation, because I know a person who like has a similar back. So a lot of it is just like, I do a lot of people watching. I just do a lot of people listening, and I take what information I can, and then I like, use the pieces to build a character off that.
I love that. I think all writers are a little bit nosy, and that's why we're so good. But in addition to that, which like is pretty much my number one, is like just observing people. But I also take things from people I know, people I really love and appreciate. Like, I borrow characteristics that I admire in, friends or family members. I have fun, like, using my imagination and just making things up. Like, okay, well, what about if it was this friend, but they were evil and like they hated XYZ? And that can be fun. And I think it's totally okay to also take inspiration from other forms of media that you love, and make it your own. That especially when you're getting started with writing, that can be a really great kind of way to exercise your writing habits, and just be like, okay, well, I love Harriet the Spy. What if Harriet the Spy was queer and brown? And how would I do that, right? And how would that change who Harriet is? And using, like, leaning into those things and kind of melding something you love and appreciate and are deeply familiar with your own personal experiences can churn out something beautiful and unique and wonderful. And so I say there's no shame in borrowing from the people you admire.
Definitely. I do the same thing still. I feel like my piece of advice would be, don't worry about making characters perfect in the first draft. If they're kind of bland to begin with, that's totally fine. Like, it can take drafts and drafts to figure out exactly who this character is and how they navigate and see the world. I particularly take astrology into consideration. I'll like grab one big personality trait from a character, be like, okay, this character is giving main character energy. That's definitely a Leo. Let me figure out what other Leo traits there are. Like, this character is a chismosa and Will is a professional talker, like fully. That's an Aquarius. Like, this character is basically Jasmine from On My Block, Sagittarius. And so, like, then I have this whole rubric of like what sort of personality traits might fit for them, and just kind of go with that and let them sort of use those to navigate their world. Next question.
Hello, my name is Patricio Fabian. My question for you is, how do you come up with the characters of the book?
Okay, this one's kind of related, but like if there's any sort of additional information on character creation, I would love to hear that.
So my main character, Ophelia, who I've realized I haven't talked much about, she is also self-proclaimed chismosa, and she's a huge hopeless romantic. And a lot of that was inspired by myself growing up and being a really big hopeless romantic and having this sort of reputation among my friends as having crushes on a lot of boys and any boy who talked to me, and like very strong romantic notions about life. So she was inspired by a lot of that with myself, and writing her was sort of a way for me to reclaim aspects of my identity that I felt like were sort of considered cliche or like embarrassing as like a teenage girl growing up. And it was cool for me to like sort of reclaim that and be like, yeah, it's fine if you just like really want someone to hold your hand when you're a teenage girl, like that's totally okay. But in trying to make her be different than myself, I gave her a hobby that I'm terrible at, and she is a botanist. She is rose gardener. I cannot take care of plants to save my life. It's not something I share with her, and I get a lot of questions from people asking for advice, and I'm like, it was all research. None of that stayed in my head. It all stayed on the book. So I think that that's a cool way to come up with characters, is by, I think all my characters are sort of like a revamped version of myself in a way, where I change sort of fundamental aspects of them. She doesn't have a big family. I have a big family. I feel like that makes a huge difference in characters. So taking inspiration from yourself or from the people around you is a great starting point, like Crystal was saying. But then sort of imagining different aspects of them, or seeing like how would everything change if this sort of fundamental aspect of their life was different. It's a fun hypothetical, but also is a great way to build characters and to allow that separation of self between you and the people you're writing about.
So actually, I started my characters based off like the types of relationships I wanted. So I didn't even really come up with a personality first. I went like, okay, what sort of relationships do I want to portray? And I've always really liked the trope where like there are these two best friends. One is kind of serious, the other one's a total goofball. Like I've always really liked that, and so that kind of cemented like two of the main characters, Raquel and her best friend Aaron, because Aaron's just like a really goofy kid and Raquel kind of puts up with him, but they're best friends, you know, like sometimes that just happens. And then I just like wanted to throw a curveball where it's like, what if they were in love with the same girl? Let's go. And that's just kind of how I introduced Charlize, the love interest of the book. So I just kind of started off with like a relationship. I was just like, okay, what kind of relationships do I want like to portray in this book? And then I built personalities off that.
I love all of these methods. I'm like writing them down. I'm like, okay, I'm going to steal some of these ideas. So for me, with No Filter and Other Lies, I kind of looked at my first book and looked at Charlie Vega, the main character in that book. And she was very sweet and romantic. And I think I tried to make her likable kind of from the get-go, thinking, okay, if I only get to write one fat brown girl, I want everybody to love her and be her bestie, and then like read this whole book and hopefully, they enjoy it. And so then when I got to do a second book, I was like, okay, now can I do the opposite of that and still hopefully have people read it and make a character who starts out kind of unlikable and makes this big mistake of catfishing? And is there a way that I can still redeem this character, right? Because I think when we're thinking about characters and creating them, I'm not just thinking about this one story, but also kind of how they fit into the landscape of stories and what kind of characters do we want to have in terms of like representation. And so if we want to, like for me, I want to have like these fat girls have these big adventures and be able to both be like kind and sweet and pine for, boys and girls, but also I want them to be able to be kind of rough around the edges and make big mistakes. And I want readers to hopefully feel like they relate to both of these characters, right? Like you can be both of those things and still deserve to be the main character and deserve wonderful, happily ever afters. So I think what ends up setting characters apart and allowing us to create these interesting characters is just writing authentically and creating characters that feel three-dimensional and real.
I just want to say, oh, sorry. I just want to say that I had a similar approach to you, Crystal, when it came to my first book versus my second book. First book is a very hopeless romantic, soft, sweet girl. Second book, very unlikable character at the start. So you take risks with the second child.
You do.
I would say I do love both of them very much.
Oh yes,
So,
Johnny's read both of them.
but yeah, so for me personally, with Jules, I think like what Crystal mentioned earlier, I took a lot of inspiration from media. Foundationally, I saw Ruby from On My Block and was like, what if I just made Ruby the queer that Ruby needs to be? And like, what if I just inserted all of my own teenage trauma? Like, that'd be kind of fun, right? And then kind of like Raquel, I just gave him a hobby that I am not good at. And so I was like, make him a soccer player. And that was sort of the formula that I used for him. And yeah, media really does inspire a lot of what my characters are, at least foundationally. I love looking at other forms of media and just seeing how that can inspire me and make me want to write. I think we have one more student question. Perfect. From Cecilia in New York. What is the most characters you've had in a story, if you know that off the top of your head?
I don't know the exact number, but it's funny that I just mentioned my second book because my second book takes place at a soccer camp and there is a soccer team and there are a lot of characters. Like, it stresses me out when I think about it because there's a full team. I gave no subs, so I think it's 11 of them. And then there are also people on other teams at the camp. And then there's the people who run the camp and there's the family members of the main character and there's peripheral side characters of like various characters. So there's like there's people who work alongside the main character in the cafeteria. There are a lot of like named characters in this book that stresses me out a little bit, but I love writing big casts. So I kind of try to do it as much as possible. My third book that I'm working on right now, I've slowed things down a bit because I'm like, you know what, let me make things a little bit easier. But first book, there's a big group of friends. Second book, there's an entire soccer team plus of characters. So a lot, essentially.
I just had to count real quick because my second book has 15 characters, whereas my first book like literally just like focuses on like 3. So I just like went from 3 to 15, and it's there a lot of moving parts in my second book. So that's definitely the most characters I've had in a story so far.
What is it about second books that were like, give me more characters? Because it's the same for me. So with Charlie Vega, I had kind of a small cast, no filter. I was like, okay, we got Kat, we got her 3 besties, we got her gigantic family and her grandparents, and also she has a sibling, and then there's all these friends, and then there's work friends for her, and then there's also all these dogs that I just added in where I'm like, she works at an animal shelter, and now all these dogs have personalities. And so it was really fun to write, wild to keep track of, and also it's nice and challenging to be like, okay, I have a bajillion characters, how am I going to make them all separate from each other so that they don't blend in right on the page? But with the third book that I have, which is unannounced, I've shrunk it a little bit for this cast, but I feel like with second book, just go big or go home, do all the characters and have fun.
You know, I think I'm the opposite. My second book has, I think, less characters than my first book. This one has like probably like around 15 too, when you think of the friends and like the romance and the families. Gotta give both of them families for some reason. And yeah, my second one, like, no, we're gonna do like 6, 7, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of characters in 1500 Miles from the Sun. I can't even keep up with them. Yeah, and I think that is our last question that we have. If y'all really quick want to let us know where we can find you, and if you want to remind us what your book is called real quick, and then we'll get y'all out of here.
So I, again, am Raquel Marie, the author of Ophelia After All, and You Don't Have a Shot, which comes out next year. You can find me on Twitter at Blonde with a Book, but the O's in book are zeros, or on Instagram at Blonde with a Book, but it's underscores between all of the words. It's sticking with a brand.
Yeah, I'm Vincent, writer of Burn Down, Rise Up, and also We Don't Swim Here, which is coming out sometime next year. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at V_E_Torado. Just kept it simple for y'all.
I love that. So I am at Crystal Wrote, which is the past tense of write, on pretty much everything. So find me and follow me. So my book, No Filter and Other Lies, came out earlier this year. Fat Chance Charlie Vega came out in 2021. And then I have the forthcoming book coming out in 2023 that is fall themed. And I will be announcing that actually probably during the month of Latinx Heritage Month. So keep an eye on social for that.
And I am Johnny Garza Villa. I wrote 1,500 Miles from the Sun and Honor and Something We're Here, which comes out next year. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny Escribe, like write, but in Spanish, and on Instagram at Johnny Instas. And yeah, thank y'all so much for being here and talking with me.
You.
I loved every minute of this, and it was fantastic.
This was so fun.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great discussion.
Thank you for attending the Arco Iris panel at the Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival, and have a great rest of the festival. Bye.